In this video, we're going to talk about something called complex numbers. And we're going to first define what complex numbers are, and then afterwards, we're going to talk about how to add and subtract them. Okay. So before we actually get into a formal definition of what complex numbers are, I want you to just kind of think about why we have different categories of numbers. Right? Well, if you think about when you first learned about numbers, you learned about numbers like this: 1, 2, 3, 4. You learned about these kinds of whole numbers, right? Numbers that you can use for counting. And then you also eventually learned that the number 0 is also a number, right? And you also learned about negative numbers, right? Like -1 or -10, -15, right? So when you first learned about numbers, you learned about only positive numbers. And then eventually you learned about the number 0, which is neither positive or negative. You learned about negative numbers. And then you also learned about numbers like this, fractions, 1/2, -3, -3/5, sorry, fraction. And you also learned about decimals, right, like 2.5, right? So all of these are different types of numbers, right? Whole numbers, integers, positive numbers, negative numbers, fractions, decimals, they're all different types of numbers. Okay. Well, now we're going to expand your knowledge of numbers into a new category, something called complex numbers. And why do we need this? We need this category for complex numbers because now we've learned about this fact that the square root of -1, that's not a real number, that's an imaginary number, which we call I. Right? So now that we're using imaginary numbers, that's why we have this new category of numbers called complex numbers. All right, so what are complex numbers? Right? Complex numbers are numbers that can be expressed in the format a plus b times I. Okay, where this a, this is your real component, and then this bi, this part here, that's the imaginary component. Okay, so for an example, I could have this complex number, 5 plus 4i, right? Where this 5, this is real, and this 4i, this is imaginary. Right, now this may seem strange to you. This may seem like this is not one number, right? But in the complex number system, this is what we call one number. This is one complex number. Okay, remember, every time you've got a complex number, it's got a real part and it's got an imaginary part. So this is one complex number. Right, another one would be like this. Let's say it had 3 minus 7i. Right? This is a complex number. Right? You got this real part, you got this imaginary part. Okay? Or I could have -6 minus 8i. Right? These are 3 examples of complex numbers. Right? It's totally weird. Right? But this is one number. Okay? In the complex number system. Even if I have a number like this, let's say I have 7i, right? This, it looks like it just has an imaginary component, but we could also think about this 7i, that's the same thing as saying 0 plus 7i, right? Where your real component is 0, and then this is your imaginary component. Okay? So kind of weird, but it's not that hard, right? Complex numbers, you got your real part, you've got your imaginary part. Alright, so we're going to talk about how to add and subtract complex numbers. Okay, so this first example, I have this complex number, -3 plus 4i, and I'm going to add that to this complex number, 7 minus 10i. Right? It's really not that hard. All we need to do is just combine our real part. So I'm going to combine -3 plus 7, and then I'm going to combine the imaginary components. So I'm going to add, let's see, plus 4i combined with -10i. Right? And our answer is going to be 4 minus 6i. Okay? There we have it. And every time you write your answer for these, you want to make sure you're using this format, a plus bi. You always want to have your answer written in this format, with your real part first, and then your imaginary part second. Alright, go ahead and pause and add these two complex numbers. Let's check if you got it right. So we can combine the real components, so 4 combined with -7, and then we can combine the imaginary part, so -5i being combined with -i. So 4 minus 7, that's -3, and then -5i minus I, that's -6i. Okay, so here's our answer. This is a complex number here, again, in the standard form, right? Our A plus BI format. Right, we're going to subtract complex numbers now. Okay, so this says we're going to take this complex number, negative 4 plus 6i, and then we're going to subtract this 3 minus 2i. Okay, well, when you do this, remember, you can think of this as this complex number, negative 4 plus 6i, and then we can think of this part here as saying, combining it with negative 1 times this 3 minus 2i. Right? So if I distribute that negative 1, it'd be negative 1 times 3 is negative 3, and negative 1 times negative 2i, let me show this here, negative 1 times negative 2i, that's plus 2i. Right? So we're combining negative 4 plus 6i with negative 3 plus 2i. I can combine my real part, negative 4 minus 3, and then I can combine the imaginary part, plus 6i plus 2i. So negative 4 minus 3, that's negative 7. 6i plus 2i, that's 8i. There's my answer. All right, I want you to do these two on your own. Okay, so pause and do number 4. Should be an easy one. You're just taking two, doing a subtraction, and then 5 is a bit of a challenge. Let's see if you can simplify that statement. Go ahead and pause and do that. All right, welcome back. Let's check your answer. So on 4, I've got 5 plus 2i, and then we can think of this part as negative 1 times negative 4 times 8i, right? So this would become negative 1 times negative 4 is plus 4, and then negative 1 times 8i is minus 8i. And then we can combine the real part, 5 plus 4. We can combine the imaginary part, plus 2i minus 8i. So this would become 9 minus 6i. All right, number 5. You have to be careful here because there's a subtraction. So this is the same thing saying negative 1 times 5, negative 1 times negative 6i. So we can say this is negative 3 plus 5i minus 5 plus 6i plus 7 minus 4i. All right, now to add this all up, let's combine all the real components. So the real components would be negative 3 minus 5 plus 7. And now we're going to combine the imaginary components, right? So that's plus 5i, plus 6i, and minus 4i. So final answer, negative 3 minus 5 is negative 8, plus 7 is negative 1. And then the imaginary part, that's going to be plus 7i. Okay, so this right here is my answer, negative 1 plus 7i.